Good evening. This week's Parsha, Parshas Yitro, the Arizal begins with a statement that Yitro was a Gilgal of Cain. Cain, we know, killed his brother Hevel, and it remained a blemish on mankind ever since. But one of the statements, says the Arizal, that Cain said was, and the Medrash brings it, less din v'less dayan. He was very upset that his korban was not received and accepted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he made this statement, less din v'less dayan, that like a kofer biker, there's no, in the world there is no judge and there is no justice, which was a reference really to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he came back and he was a Gilgal into Yitro, and that's why we find that after Yitro came in and he was with the people and he saw Vayehimi Mocharos the day after. And the Rashi brings, of course, the Chazal after what? It was the day after Yom Kippur, when the world received its eternal Slicha, Mechil, and Kapara on Yom Kippur, not just for that year, but for every Yom Kippur that would come in Bria. So he saw that his son-in-law, Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a long line of people waiting for his decision in halacha, like a din Torah, one by one. And he immediately, Yitro, his father-in-law, stepped in and said that this is not the way to do it. You will wither away. You won't be able to stand up to the non-stop morning to night, 6 in the morning till 12 at night, taking care of issues, but you have to delegate and designate others and break it down. The easier shilas to this group, the harder shilas to the next group, and the big shilas would be brought to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why, says the Arizal, was this his involvement of talking about a court system, a system of justice? Because that was his tikkun when he was Cain, and he said, less din v'less dayan, that there's no judge and there's no justice. So he had to come back, and he had to come into Klal Yisrael, which would be the disseminator of and the pacemaker for everything in this world. I mean, even Lahavdal Elf Havdalas, as we know, that each and every religion came out of the Jewish religion. And I wouldn't sit here for the next hour citing each religion of what we find and how we see that it was the pacemaker for paving the way for other religions with the blueprint and the background and the customs and the halachas of Yiddishkeit. And that's why he addressed specifically that. Now we know that when he came, the Medrash says that the Ananei HaKavod, which protected Klal Yisrael, and not only there were two sets of anonim, one around Klal Yisrael, and there was one that was above. So between the two, nothing bad could come in, and nothing bad could happen to the Yidden inside. The Medrash says that when Yitro got there, the anonim did not allow him to come in because he did not have a bris. So he immediately did the bris, and when we see in the pasuk that he brought Ola uzvachim lelokim, it was his sudas bris. It was the suda of his bris, And he was so enthused and thrust into the enthusiasm that he brought the korbanos, and it says that the whole Klal Yisrael did not eat from his korbanos, the suda he made, and that's why the pasuk says, Le'echol lechem im chosein Moshe lifnei Elokim, which means that he, at the end, saw that there was lechem, and when they came, they realized that he had a machshava of pigul, which passes the korban. He brought a korban shlomim, he brought an olah, he brought things that he thought that Klal Yisrael would enjoy. Ruchnius, this was part of the suda of his bris, and that they would partake, but the Medrash says no one ate anything except for the bread. They washed and they had bread to show that they were participating, and on the bread there was no shaila in any which way, so they were able to eat the bread, but the other stuff they didn't, because he didn't know yet the halachas of bringing a korban, and pigul is one of them that disqualifies the korban, so you're not allowed to eat it. So they did not eat anything other than the bread that he brought. Now the Al-Shach HaKadosh says that the opening word of our Sedr, Vayishma Yisro Chohen Midyan Chosein Moshe, that the word Vayishma, and he heard, is really extra, and Rashi comes and brings the Chazal to answer, what's this hearing? What did he hear? In other words, he wanted to visit, he wanted to be Megayer, which he immediately was Megayer when he had the bris. That what's this heard? So Rashi says, the Chazal, that Mashmua Shama Uba, what did he hear and that brought him, propelled him to want to come? That Rashi says that he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf, he heard about the Mechoma with Amalek, he was impressed what happened to Klal Yisrael. But above everything else, it says that most impressed, and Rashi brings this, was the fact that the Yidden came out of Mitzrayim. Now, if I went around and asked each and every one of you listening, if you saw that the Yidden left Mitzrayim, and you then saw Kriyas Yamsuf, you would be more impressed with the fact that they left Mitzrayim than the actual Kriyas Yamsuf? I mean, where did you ever see a sea split and there were 12 paths that each Shevet went down its own path, and they didn't come out on the other side, as Chazal say. They went around like a U, and they ended up coming out on the same side that they went in. So there were tremendous miracles over here. So would you think that going out of Mitzrayim was a bigger nest than that? Or let's say, it says later in Rashi that he saw that there was mon, that they were being sustained, that it was hard for him to comprehend that from Shamayim was coming down a food that they could think whatever they wanted it to be, a custard pie or a lemon tart or a chocolate mousse or a steak, whatever. They could think whatever they want, and that's what it tasted like to them. But the most he was lahotzi as Bnei Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, says Rashi, that this was the most impressive. So the question asked is, as I said, why did he think that this was bigger than all the other nisim v'niflos that Klal Yisrael encountered and experienced? And they say that the reason is that he was so impressed with that is because the Medrash says there was never in the history of Mitzrayim any slave who succeeded in escaping. Never happened. Now, when you hear that, you thought maybe they had wired fences and they had attack dogs, or who knows what their protection from an escapee was. But that's not the reason Chazal say. Chazal say was because the Klal Yisrael was so demoralized. The goal of Mitzrayim was to demoralize the people to a point that they couldn't pick up their heads. That means a person to want to escape has to have some independence or some daring moment in his mind to buck the whole tide and to run out of everywhere where he was when others were not doing it. He could be caught and killed on the spot. But not one person in Mitzrayim had that thriving moment to want to get out because they were so demoralized by the work. They were told to build a building, and then after they got done with their sweat and their blood and being whipped on and everything else, they came and they demolished the building. In other words, it was the most demoralized. They gave the men the women's work and the women the men's work. It was, everything was fashioned to break the spirit and to pull down Klal Yisrael. And it didn't, and it did effectively happen. They were, and that's why no one ever could pick up their head to want to get out. They wanted to go, but they never followed through with it because they couldn't bring themselves to that point. But over here, their spirit was so broken that they couldn't want to escape. But the answer is that the nest that Yitro understood, that yes, Kriyas Yamsuf is a miraculous, supernatural thing. Of course he understood it. But he also understood the state of mind of the Yidden in Mitzrayim, and that Hashem was able to pull them out. And that's the taich in the pasuk in Shemos, Mitachas Sivlos Mitzrayim. Sivlos means oppression, but Sivlos means Savlonus also, that they got used to it. In other words, they were put down, and where they were down low, they accepted that this is how we're going to have to live. We have our piece of bread every day to eat, and we have to be beaten on. It was part of life. This was something that they accepted. Hashem said, I'm going to take you out of the Sivlos Mitzrayim, that which you got used to. That's a word from the Chidushei Harim. To take them out of the Sivlos Mitzrayim of being so put down. Now the Al-Shach HaKadosh says that Vayishma, and he heard, nobody else came running to be Megayer. The whole world knew about Kriyas Yamsuf and knew what was going on with the Nisim and the flows. Why wasn't there 100,000, 1,000,000 people coming to be Megayer? But the answer is they heard, but it didn't seep into their psyche, that it was internalized and it became so much consumed by the human mind that it made a metamorphosis, a transformation in the mind of Paro, of Yisro. Yisro Vayishma, that it went into the innermost sanctum of his mind and the atzmius, the actual being, his very fiber of his being, it entered into, it seeped in, and it made a transformation in his thinking process that he picked himself up and he ran to become a Yid. And that's why the Pasuk stresses, says the Al Shach HaKadosh, the word Vayishma, because the biggest problem with a Yid is that he hears a lot of good things. And he hears a lot of good ideas. And he hears about how people implemented their ideas. But Yitro went deeper, and it brought from ideas and concepts and hearing what was said into action. And says the Al Shach HaKadosh, that's why it went so much so that the millions who heard about it didn't react. But he, Yitro, did react, and he set into motion. Now, another word that Chazal are question, the Rashi says, Ma shmua shama uba, what did he hear? And he came. What's this word, uba? It just could have said, Mashmur Shama, what did he hear? And answer it with Kriyas Yamsuf, with Melchemes HaMolek, with everything else that happened. But Yitro came, and I'm going to tell you two short stories which will answer for you this question of the idea to be able to understand why Rashi brought the word uva. There was a story with Reb Chaim Volozhner's yeshiva that he was sitting at a breakfast table with 8 Talmidim. At that table, there were 8 Talmidim. And a Rov of this in the city came in, and he walked over to the table and he says, I have a shaila that I want to ask, and let's see if any of you can answer the shaila. And he posed the shaila, and there were 2 Talmidim of the 8 who answered his shaila and gave him a good answer. There was a Talmud who didn't know the answer, and it bothered him so that he said on the spot that for the next 7 years, I'm not leaving the Beis HaMedrash except to sleep, to go to the washroom, and to eat, to survive. Other than that, I'm not walking outside. I'm not going for any fresh air. I'm not going for any little bit of a walk and spazier. And he did it for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, he came back and he asked Reb Chaim Volozhner a question. When I said at that breakfast table that I'm going to put myself into the Beis HaMedrash for 7 years, I realized that I hadn't benched. In other words, we were eating breakfast, and I had eaten bread, and I had to bench. But I was so enveloped in this thirst to get into the Beis HaMedrash. How could it be that the 2 of them answered the shaila and I had nothing to say? So I didn't bench, and I ran into the Bais HaMedrash. And after 7 years, he came back to Reb Chaim Volozhner, and he asked him, was it better that I shouldn't have gone to the Bais HaMedrash for the 7 years, or that I should have benched? And Reb Chaim Volozhner said, of course you did wrong that you didn't bench, because benching is a d'oraisa, and you had a chiyuv d'oraisa to bench. But had you benched, you never would have been for 7 years in the Bais HaMedrash. What did he mean by that? He meant that when a person is enthused or uplifted and has a sincere begging, inner begging to do something good, he has to do it on the minute. Because if he lets any time lapse, then he'll end up deviating or not doing what he originally thought to do. So it's an interesting story, and it's a little painful because he said if you would have benched, you never would have ended up in the Bais Medrash, even though you should have benched. And the second story that I want to tell you is in the Chofetz Chaim's yeshiva in Radin, they once received an envelope, and there was 500 ruble in cash in the envelope. It didn't say who it was from. It didn't have a requirement of a signature. It just came. So the administrator of the Radna Yeshiva went into the Chofetz Chaim and said, here is an envelope. It doesn't say who sent it. And there's 500 ruble in it, which in those times, any cash, I mean, even today, if you put into the mail cash, there's a good chance it's going to be stolen. So the Chofetz Chaim said to him, try to find out and bring to me the man. Now, he didn't have any return address or any name, but he saw postmarked or something, some siman on the envelope that told him it was from a little hamlet, a little village around 8 miles away from Radin. And he traveled to that town and he did research for a week or two, and he finally found the man that sent the envelope. And he said, the Chofetz Chaim wants to speak to you. The whole world heard of the Chofetz Chaim, and he immediately packed something and left in the wagon with the administrator back to Radin. He came into the Chofetz Chaim, and the Chofetz Chaim asked him, it was so unconventional to send cash the way you sent it. Why did you? Why didn't you at least write your name or a little note? So the man answered and said, I understand the risk that I took. It seems like the man was a very big businessman, and he told the Chofetz Chaim that I was in the middle of doing a deal that would have been tremendous profit for me. And I said that if I succeed in this business deal, I'm going to give 500 ruble to the Radner Yeshiva. And I succeeded in the deal. And I went to take an envelope, and the Yetzer Hara said to me, 500 ruble? They would be dancing if you gave 50 ruble. If you'd give 20 ruble, like a ruble was like $300, 500 each ruble. You gave such a sum. What are you doing? So I realized that if I didn't immediately send the 500 ruble to the Radner Yeshiva, by the time I wrote a note and by the time I addressed and wrote a return address and did everything properly, that I'd end up sending 20 ruble. And my promise was 500 ruble. So I just stuffed it in an envelope, addressed it to the Radner Yeshiva, and sent it. And I took a big risk. But that's the way it ended up happening. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. So the story with the Reb Chaim Volozhner's Talmidim and his answer, and this story with the Radner Yeshiva brings out one point, why Rashi uses the word uva, that when Yitro was inspired and he was uplifted to do something quickly, he knew that he couldn't wait to pack his bags and to take 2 weeks to come. Uva. He not just shama shemua, that he heard the nisim and the flows. Oh, that's what happened. I'm going to be Megayer. Uva. And he, on that minute, came running to his son-in-law and to Klal Yisrael. Now, when Yitro gave the actual eitzah of establishing a court system, he said, V'hizarta, that you have to be careful to do all the mitzvahs and do all of this. And then he ended up saying, V'hodata es haderech asher yelchu va. So the question asked, once you said v'hizarta, keep all the mitzvahs and everything, and you're going to answer their shilas, and they should learn how to keep the mitzvahs. Why did the pasuk have to end up v'hodata es haderech asher yelchu va? And you have to also teach them how and what path to go in. Isn't that encompassed in the words v'hizarta? So, there is a story in the Gemara in Gittin, Daf Nun Ches, that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya, who was one of the biggest and oldest Tanoim of that generation, he went to Rome on a mission for Klal Yisrael, and he was told that there was a boy that Rome took as a captive, the Gemara says, and he was sitting in jail, and he was a remarkable young boy, probably a teenager. He was beautiful. The Gemara says that his hair was something like supernaturally beautiful. And he was a very nice boy. So it says in the Gemara that when Rome pillaged and plundered Jerusalem, they took back some hostages, and this boy was one of them. And when Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya went outside the prison by the window of where this boy was, he saw that the boy had an unusual sense of what to do and how to live as a Yid. I mean, here he was in a prison. Who knows if he had kosher? Who knows what he was eating? But he was impressed with him. And he quoted a pasuk from Mishlei, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya, that he should be able to find his path. And he started to quote the pasuk, and the boy from inside the jail finished the pasuk. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya was overwhelmed. And he said, this boy is going to come out of the jail, and he is going to not only go back to his people, but he's going to become a Mora Hora. He's going to become a Rav and a leader by Klal Yisrael. So the Meforshim on the Gemara asks, what was he so impressed? There were many children in those days that they knew Baal Peh, Tanakh, they knew these. So the fact that he was able to end the pasuk with the wording, Why was he so overwhelmed at this sight? And the Gemara Taka says that Rabbi Yehoshua put together the money and didn't leave there till he had enough money that Rome was masking to let the boy go. And it says that he became Taka Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, the famous Tana. This boy grew up and not just became a Talmud Chacham and not just continued his Yiddish, but he became a world famous Tana. So the question asked, why was Rabbi Yehoshua so impressed with him? And they answer and say, because in his words, when he quoted the pasuk, he wasn't wanting to show off, but he wanted to say that the end of the pasuk, which talks about people who go astray and needed to do tshuva and come back to Yiddishkeit, that the boy quoted the end of the pasuk, because on that pasuk, Mefarshim say that people who deal with these type of people have to know how to address them and how to get them back. And Rabbi Yehoshua saw in the boy that he understood what leadership meant, and that's why he said, "You not just you'll become a rov." The lashon, he said, you're going to be a mora hora. Hora means to show the way of what to do and what not to do. So the point coming out of this story is that the reason our question was, if it says v'hizarti, you're going to have to be careful to keep all the mitzvahs. What do you have to finish the pasuk? V'odata lahem es haderech asher yelchu vo. Because the leadership role of a father in a household, a teacher in a classroom, a rov in a community, is to understand that, of course, we all put on the same tefillin. We all take a lulav that's kosher, what the halacha calls for. But when dealing with avodas Hashem, many people have a different way of reaching the goal of trying to perfect their avos Hashem, their yiras Hashem, and their avodas hakodesh. That's the reason that you will find that, as it's mentioned in halacha, that every shul is supposed to have 12 windows. Why 12 windows? To represent each shevet, and say the meforshim that it's not just some nice thing to do that you have each shevet represented, but it's to tell you that each and every person has to understand and appreciate different people's minhagim. We are unfortunately a people who are quick to judge. If you're in a shul where everyone's wearing a black hat and that they don't come into daven without a hat and a jacket, and somebody walks in with a little knitted yarmulke, so many people, they won't say anything to embarrass the person, but they're looking down at the guy before they even know his name, what he does, who he is, where he's from, because they see the little yarmulke and that looks like a guy that's half from to them. They pass the judgment right away. And that's why when a famous Rav was becoming a Rav some 40 years before, he went to Reb Hershel Spinka in Williamsburg and asked him, what advice would the Rav give me? I'm becoming a Rav, I was accepted for a pulpit, for a shul, and it's a big shul. what advice does the Rebbe give to me? And his answer was that on the pasuk of Yifkod Hashem Elokei Aruchos, after the story of the Meraglim, that Moshe Rabbeinu said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, now we have to start thinking about my successor. And the Medrash says he was really talking about his own son. He wanted his son to take over. And Hashem answered him and said, no, it won't be one of your sons. It's going to be Yehoshua, your star Talmud. He's going to take over the leadership, the mantle of leadership of Klal Yisrael. And the Rashi says that he was told that it has to be a person that is shava b'shava with ever, that there's different, each and every one has ein daitoseyim shavos, not everyone thinks the same way, and not everyone behaves the same way. The word tolerance, and that's what Rabbi Yehoshua Spinka said. My advice to you is be tolerant. When you have 150 mispalalim, you're going to have 150 different opinions sometimes on an issue. And you have to condition yourself, because you'll have your own opinion. And you have to condition yourself that when you hear an opinion that is diametrically opposed to your own thinking, that you could still love the mispalel, deal with the mispalel, work with the mispalel, and do everything to uplift him, and not to become sour on speaking to him even. Oh, that guy thinks like that. Who wants anything to do with him? Meshuggah, how could he even think that? How could he possibly do this or that? Because it's completely different than your thoughts. And that was the advice he gave. And that is exactly what this boy was saying, and how Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania understood it, and he was so impressed with him that he understood that even with people, the end of the pasuk, who sway, but there's a way to reach them if you understand that not everyone is the same. So when it shows the 12 windows in a shul that we should have, because each and every shevet was distinctly different than the next. Yisachar was by a Gemara all day and night. Zavulun didn't open the Gemara. He was busy making the parnasa on the seas so he could support Yisachar. Each and every one had dynamics, as Chazal say, which was basically completely different. They were all tzaddikim gemurim, and they were able to rise to the highest of levels, like the Zohar HaKadosh, I've said to you, says, that they were chayav misa because they sold their brother, and the halacha is if you kidnap someone and you gain money from it, they gain the 20 silver coins. That's misa. If you only kidnap, it's not misa. But if you gain financially from it, it is a chayav misa. So why weren't they killed? Asked the Zohar HaKadosh, and the answer the Zohar HaKadosh says, because there was no malach in heaven that could execute them, come down here to kill them. Not the malach hamavis and not anyone else, because they were such tzaddikim gemurim. But they were still different than each other. So when we look at a shul that Sfardim, that we would look, oh, they eat rice on Pesach. Who could possibly tolerate with love? Tolerate other minhagim, other halachas, that some have a difference than what you've grown up with and what you are. And I want to also inject my deep appreciation to Torah Anytime, which so magnificently and so honorably and so with proper deos and proper Mekadesh Shemayim Barabim, for all they do for Klal Yisrael, to broadcast all of these beautiful divrei Torah of so many leaders and so many Rabbanim, and the Rabbanu Shalom should give them continued success and the ability to not only strive with what they do, but to thrive, and their efforts should be doubled and increased. And the Rabbanu Shalom, I'm sure, has the greatest and most beautiful nachas ruach from them. Now, it says that Yitro had 7 names, and one of them was Yeser. And Chazal say, the Medrash brings it, and Rashi says so also, that Yeser means to add on. And since there was an extra parsha added on in his name, we call the parsha Yitro. But the Medrash says the main thing of this parsha is the fact that he added on Va'ata Techazeh. You see, when he was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you can't continue carrying the whole load yourself, that there's like 12 psukim in his discussing and saying it. In the middle of these 12, like the 6th pasuk, are the words Va'ata Techazeh. You should see to do this and do that to correct the situation. So the Meforshim ask, why is it that his parsha added in the Torah is from Va'ata Techazeh? It's the 6th pasuk. His discussion began differently in the beginning. So the Meforshim answer and say that the reason that the parsha that he added to us in the Torah is Va'ata Techazeh, because that was the beginning of the constructive solution. That means the psukim before was all the criticism, which was valid. And you see Moshe Rabbeinu accepted it. And then when he said the solution, Va'ata Techazeh, take heads to be able to deal with lesser shilas and bigger shilas and whatever, that's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu did. But at the same token, half was criticism and half was solution. And if you criticize someone even for the best reason, and l'shem shamayim, if you don't have a solution, don't offer the criticism. People do not thrive with criticism. They thrive with criticism cushioned with love and positivity, and then they are open with their hearts, their ears, their minds to your constructive solution to the problem. And that's the reason why in the Midrashim and in the Gemara, it's referred to as that he added the extra parsha of Va'ata Techazeh, and it doesn't mention anything about the psukim before because they are all criticism. And this was the perfect, beautiful solution for him. Now, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh asks, what's this business that to create our Botei Dinim and everything else, we had to get it from a goy? I mean, Yisro his whole life, let's call a spade, was an Oived Avodah Zarah. And Klal Yisrael didn't forget it. By Pinchas, when he went and killed Zimri ben Solu and Cosbi bas Tzur, Shevet Shimon got up and said, this guy whose grandfather fattened calves and goats to Avodah Zorah? He's going to be the one to go kill a Nasi from our Shevet, from Shevet Shimon? So they still remembered what he did long before. He wasn't forgotten so much. So why was it he? And the Or HaChaim says, really, to me, it's fascinating that he answers such an answer to his question. Why was it from a goy that his advice established all of our Sanhedrins and our Batei Dinim and everything else? So he answers and says, to teach Klal Yisrael that goyim are very smart and their advice sometimes is very valid. That means if you talk to an average yeshiva bacher and say that there were two opinions, a yid said this and it was brilliant, and a goy said that and it wasn't so brilliant, so the yeshiva bacher would answer, yeah, a goyish cup, a goy's head and his thinking. So the Or HaChaim quotes that, and he says not to think so, that there were some yesh chochma bagoyim, that there is tremendous chochma bagoyim, and that we should never put down the goyim of the world. So says the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. And we know that the Or HaChaim HaKadosh was so big that the Baal Shem Tov 4 times in his life tried to get to Eretz Yisrael to meet the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, because the Baal Shem Tov said that he was a bechina, he himself, the Baal Shem Tov, was a bechina of nefesh, and the Or HaChaim HaKadosh was a bechina of ruach. And if he would have met him physically and just, they would have seen each other and spoken for a minute, Mashiach would have to come. So you imagine how big the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, that the Baal Shem Tov about himself said he was just the area of nefesh, and that the bechina of ruach was the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, and it's that same Or HaChaim HaKadosh. They never met, by the way. The Baal Shem Tov tried 4 times. The 4th and final time, he was almost killed with his whole family. He said, I see that they don't want me to reach Eretz Yisrael and to see the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. So he said it just to teach Klal Yisrael with attitudes. Don't put down goyim when they come with sound, good advice, because they don't have Torah, but they do have a bechina of chokhmah. Now, the parsha begins in the very first pasuk, and it says that Vayishma Yisro Choen Midyan Chosein Moshe. Now, Kohen Midyan really is a slap to Yisro, because what was he a Kohen? He was a priest in every religion of Avodah Zorah. And he kept throwing them away, and they put him in Chayim. His daughters went out to take care of the sheep, because the Medrash says that he was put in Chayim by every single religion, so he couldn't walk out of his house. And he had to send the girls to go do whatever work had to be done. So, if we had someone, let's say a Baal Tshuva, who became a Baal Tshuva 30 years ago, and we were honoring him at a dinner. He became successful, or he was a parent that was a volunteer in the local yeshiva, so they felt he was due the honor. Would we get up and say that a man of such rare and remarkable distinction, he does this, look at his family, and also he was a real Machal Shabbos 30 years ago? Would we say that and when we're honoring a person? Why does the pasuk say Kohen Midyan? All the Meforshim ask it. That's a slap at Yisro. That's to remind, oh yeah, you were once a big idol worshiper. So the Meforshim say it's not Genai. It's not negativity. it's praise. Because there's no one in the world that fell lower than Yitro. Because there was no one else who became a kohen. Not only he became part of the religion, he became the pope of that religion. And from that level of his servicing and doing, dropped it in front of everyone, was put into chayrim by the group because they were insulted and offended. And now he was able to become a Yid, and that he was able to be so proud of his Yiddishkeit that when he left, he was a full-fledged Yid. And somewhere in Choron, in Turkey, when they take you there, they show you this is the house where Yitro lived. This is the house where this is where his daughters, as a matter of fact, he put Moshe Rabbeinu for 10 years into jail when he was there running away from Paro, and he came there and the daughters went and called him to come eat and have bread and everything else. So Yitro was afraid that Paro would catch him in his house and kill Moshe and kill him. So he had him put into a jail right near his house. And it says that Zipporah, who became his wife, went every day quietly and brought him the food to survive. 10 years. But he ended up becoming the Eidim of Yitro. Now, the Kotzker Rebbe we have in this week's Sedra, the Aseres HaDibros. And the one mentioned, the Aseres HaDibros in Voyas Chan, is a repeat. But the actual, real Aseres HaDibros is this week, Parshas Yitro. And the Kotzker Rebbe once asked, why is it that at the end of the Aseres HaDibros, it itemizes? In other words, it says, lo sachmod, you shouldn't be jealous or lust someone else's wife, and then it says beso, his house, and then it says his animals, and it gives items. When the other dibros were said, it doesn't say specifics. When it says lo sirtzach, you shouldn't kill, that's an all-encompassing statement. And unless the Gemara learns out that you're allowed to kill, let's say someone's roidif you and he's running after you with a gun to kill you, you're not allowed to kill. And it says lo signav, you shouldn't steal. It doesn't go in, well, you shouldn't steal from your friend and from your neighbor. But by la sachmod, that's what it does. So the Kotzker said that the reason for it is because by lo sachmod, it is such a sickness in the innermost sanctum of a person who's jealous that the pasuk tells you, don't just be jealous, because let's say you're jealous of his house or his wife, as the pasuk says, or his flock of sheep. But it goes down one by one, because if you have a general tendency to jealousy, remember that you may be jealous of the new car, but there's so much other packaging. There's a wife, there's a house, there's children that you would never want to be in that person's position. So don't pick something out that you think you would want for yourself, because there's 100 other things that you would never want for yourself, and you have to eradicate the jealousy. Now, the kasha is asked, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, at one time, all Aseres HaDibros, all 10. And then Moshe Rabbeinu had to come and say one by one, and even the first one, Porchan Nishmason, they died on the spot. They begged Moshe Rabbeinu, you hear it from Hashem and then give it over to us. We can't hear it from Hashem, it's too powerful. We're losing our souls. And that was only the first two that he said, and the rest Moshe Rabbeinu said, Kadosh Baruch Hu said it, and he repeated it to Klal Yisrael. But why, if no one understood what he was saying, did he say at first everything at one time, and then he went and said each one separately? And the answer the Meforshim say is, because Kadmonim bring this, the fact that he said it all at one time was to tell you that it's above, just like you can't understand it when it's all said at one time, 10 different things in one statement, which was a nest that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. Just like you can't understand it, so don't think you understand it when you hear each and every one of it. And we mentioned just a moment ago, Lo Sirtzach. You find people who think with their own seichel that they understand the concept of, let's say, Lo Sirtzach or any other of the things. When you hear the debate, Lo Aleinu, Lo Aleichem, of, let's say, abortion, and they say, and the halacha is that abortion in general is pure murder. But somebody comes and says, listen, this is my body, I can do what I want. This is my child that's in me. I can kill the child, I can have the abortion. Or there's euthanasia, which a doctor comes in and tells a family that, there's no hope and they're going to be a vegetable the rest of their lives. And they're in a coma, you may as well disconnect any life support because there's no use anyway. And by the way, many times doctors said that, and 6 years later or 10 years later, the person woke up and lived another 40 years. But the bottom line is that whether we think with our seichel we can rationalize and give a good reason for something we want to do or we feel we should do, and justify it with our rationale, you should know that every dibur and every mitzvah is above your own seichel. And even if you come to a situation that you think that you understand it and that we're not supposed to go out in the street and kill, but an abortion, why not? It's not a wanted life. The only time that a person should lose his neshama and disconnect a machine is when the Ribono Shel Olam wants to do it. He gives life and he takes away life. No human being has the right or the capacity to ever feel that they are in the driver's seat with life and death. Now, there are cases of an abortion. Sometimes the mother's life is at risk, and they have to ask a shaila from a competent, orthodox, frum Rav who knows halacha inside out, and he passed him, yes, to save the mother's life, because the child, if it's going to cause the death of the mother, the child becomes a rodef, as if running after the mother with a gun, and the mother may lose her life. But only a Rav can paskin that, and you have to be very, very careful. Anyway, this week of our Parsha, rich with all of these Chazal, should seep into our psyche, and that we should become part and parcel of them, and that we should automatically move in the direction of where our machshava leads us, and that we should be able to be a reflection of a true nachas ruach to our Kodesh Baruch Hu.